And what triggered you to go from the world of code to no code?
Primarily laziness.
Yeah.
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 No, I mean, in all seriousness, building software is something I've loved to do forever. So the better part of 25 years, I've been building software. And one of the things that's just really been kind of a thorn on my side is that people hold software as some type of magic, or magicians can build software. And something that's always just driven me nuts is that software does not need to be difficult.
Right.
And when your entire business is beholden to what the software developers can do, beholden to their timelines, what they're willing to do, or sometimes how they're willing to do it, makes things so much more difficult.
Right.
So really putting that power into the hands of the business and kind of demystifying the whole software development as a thing is something that I'm just extremely passionate about. Making it simple solutions to solve business problems.
No code is still, though, right, with all of these kinds of macro and micro forces at play, no code is still fairly new market. This concept of people being able to build solutions without a line of code. And a lot of the platforms out there that currently exist are kind of this drag and drop approach. And then on the flip side, you have these kind of low code, no codes that are really just slightly simpler languages, but still kind of coding languages at play. You didn't, from what I can understand, the platform that you developed doesn't really take either one of those approaches. It's not drag and drop. It's certainly not code. I'd love for you to share a bit about kind of the approach you've taken to still give power over to the business people in control their software, but not in this drag and drop fashion.
Sure. Yeah. So there's give and take for everything. So the drag and drop stuff, sure, it's easy to use, but you're dragging and dropping components that were pre-built. So in a real no-code environment, a really business solution, if everything's pre-built, you're really not getting yourself too much further from today's world of having a bunch of siloed or disparate applications. So, and then the flip side of that are these new, these low-code platforms or no-code solutions that are really just new programming language masquerading as no-code.
Right.
So we kind of took the approach of really leveraging what businesses already understand about the processes, understand about their data, and give them a relatively intuitive interface to build what their data set looks like. So companies understand what their data is. They'll understand what a trip is, or what inventory controls are, and these kinds of stuff, and they'll understand how their business, how their company, how their departments, how their employees work with that data, and where that data comes from and where it's generated.
Right.
So those two pillars is where Optimum is, and the adaptive software platform that Optimum HQ is really kind of boils that down and says you don't really need to concern yourself so much about your users or roles or security, all this kind of stuff built into the platform. You just need to worry about what's your data sets and what's your workflows.
So, I mean, before the kind of no-code, low-code movement, the only way to speak in this language data sets and workflows was to type in code. And in essence, you've now built a platform that just can speak directly in the language of data sets and workflows.
Correct. Well, yeah. So I would say the language. So if you have enough background in like an Excel spreadsheet, you kind of understand what data looks like.
What type of skill sets do you need in order to build a no-code platform? I mean, can anybody do it? Because I'm sure there are still people who wouldn't be comfortable kind of building out a solution on this type of platform. But who is kind of that person who's not the developer necessarily? Because I imagine developers can still build on it. But who's that person who's more in the layman mindset that could build on a no-code platform like yours?
Yeah, I would say anybody who's, I guess, savvy around data. So people who, like business analysts, just do amazingly well.
Right.
We actually have what we call solution architects. People understand, what data looks like and how processes work. They don't need to worry about lines of code or anything like that, or database connections, or what programming languages am I going to use. They really just got to understand, I've got this data set and I've got like an invoice, for instance. So I've got an invoice, and an invoice has line items.
Right.
So those are two data sets. So if you can kind of understand what the relationship between a line item on an invoice is, then you've got enough kind of a background to understand from the data side. And from the workflow side, it's really about understanding what your steps are. So step one is to gather information from my customer or from a telephone call or whatever it is. Step two is to take that information and put it into this data set, or maybe it's some, adding all the lines together on an invoice would be another step that workflow would do.
Right. That's interesting. Even as you're sharing that, I'm thinking about somebody at my previous company who was a sales engineer who was a wizard when it came to Excel spreadsheets, but in no way was he a developer. And I could see him kind of falling in love with this kind of solution just because he'd love to have that level, kind of that degree of control over the process, but definitely didn't have the coding background to build anything out.
Right.
He would just stitch together pivot tables until he got what he needed, which didn't seem like the easiest way to go about doing things.
Right.
It definitely took quite a bit of time, but it's almost, you're saying anybody who's kind of data minded, comfortable with an Excel spreadsheet or with spreadsheets generally and data generally, they can find a way to building out solutions on this type of platform.